Hi everyone, my name is Gray. I'm the dietitian and health coach with MLK Health Center and Pharmacy. Our grocery store landscape is still very much affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. One of the noteworthy things is that just about everywhere there are limits on how much meat you can buy at one time. So I figured I would embrace that, and for this cooking demo I would make a vegetarian recipe. What I've got here is the ingredients for a cauliflower lentil stew. This is actually something that I've been making for years. It's really tasty, it's super easy, which is probably why I keep coming back to it. And even some of the most vegetable averse people that I know like this recipe, which I think is encouraging. So we've got lots of nutritious ingredients here. Of course, a variety of different vegetables. That's always going to be key if we're making something vegetarian. So we have diced tomatoes, our aromatics, onion, garlic, celery, carrot, as well as our cauliflower and kale. If you haven't tried kale before, working it into a soup or a stew can be a good way to try that initially, because it kind of hides some of the other flavors if you're sort of spooked by leafy greens. We've also got a bag of lentils. Usually when people mention vegetarianism, protein is the first thing we're concerned about. But if you cooked this entire bag of lentils, it would have just over 100 grams of protein. Now, obviously you're not going to eat the whole pot, but divvying that out into the number of portions, 6 or 8 portions, there's going to be plenty of protein in a bowl of this cauliflower lentil stew. On top of that, I've got some homemade bone broth, or you could just buy, just a normal store-bought stock. And also our spices are cayenne, cumin, thyme, and bay leaves, salt, pepper, of course. So I think we're ready to go. Let's get started. So we're gonna start by prepping our aromatics. So this calls for 1 onion. This is a huge onion, so I'm just gonna use half. That'll be more appropriate. So we wanna split the hairs anytime you're cutting an onion. It's not exactly half, but it'll work. And then, whoops. I trim off not the hair side, but the opposite. Get all those little scraps out of the way. From here, we want to peel off that papery outer layer. And then since this is kind of a large onion, I'm going to go in about halfway. Okay. And then downward cuts like so. Whoops, maybe about 1/4 inch apart, a little less, all the way across. We have our fanned out onion, and we're gonna go the opposite direction. All right, now we have our even diced onion. This recipe calls for 2 cloves of garlic. Normally I would use the pre-minced stuff that comes in the jar, but I just ran out, so I'm using fresh today. So if you're not sure what to do with garlic, it's got a little papery skin on it, kind of like the onion. So what you're gonna do is put your knife on top of it with the sharp edge facing away from you, and just kind of press the hand or the heel of your hand down into that knife. Trim off the little woody end there, but smashing it is going to make it quite a bit easier to get that papery skin off. And then from there, you want to have your little tucked fingers. Just going to cut across little bitty tiny cuts. Go slowly once you get close to your finger. It's not a race. All right, and then just working back across that. You're just going to do this over and over and over until you have a teeny tiny little mince. Up next is celery. We need 2 ribs of celery, so I'll stack them like that and then Just run my knife all the way up. And then toss these little root ends. Something to keep in mind too with your leftover celery here, if you're anything like me, this is something that would definitely die in my produce drawer. So instead of doing that, what I'll do instead, I'll usually just lop off the end here. There we go. I'll run a little water down in there just to get all the junk out. But after that, I'll just go through and dice this up just like I did the other rib. So just cutting down all the way down the length of this celery, and then I'll freeze this leftover portion. So just anytime you have a soup or stew or something that calls for just a couple of ribs of celery, you can pull from what you have frozen. So that way you get to use up all of this instead of only using this and having the rest go bad. Next, we're gonna need 2 carrots. Now, a lot of recipes will tell you to peel the carrots first. Personally, I just leave any outer skin on because oftentimes the skin has lots of nutrition and it's easier. So this is pretty straightforward. We can lop off those ends, but then from there, just cutting little rounds. And if the carrot is especially thick, I guess, up towards the top, what you can do is go about halfway like this, cutting these rounds, and then from there you can cut this upper portion in half like that. Put that flat side down and then continue chopping that into smaller pieces. Next up is cauliflower. So what we're gonna do here is peel off these large leaves here on the underside. Once we have those off, you can see a little better. So we're gonna insert our knife down into that space and disconnect these florets. So I'm only going to use about half of the cauliflower for this recipe, and we do want it in smaller pieces. So once we have these florets removed, I just go through and kind of cut them into little slices like this, maybe run my knife back through the other way until we have smaller cauliflower pieces. Last but not least is the kale. So you don't actually have to use a knife if you don't want to. What you can do to remove this rib is just grab down here at the base of these leaves and just pull upward, and that's going to get most of that woody stem out. So do that with these leaves. There we go. And then from there, you can just tear it into smaller pieces with your hands if you want, or you can take your knife and just kind of rough chop it to break that up into smaller pieces. You're gonna need about 2 cups. So our final step before we add everything to the crock pot, I got a pan hot, added our oil, and now we're gonna add our onions. It's a very hot pan. Add our onions and saute those. Probably gonna cook it for 4 or 5 minutes. Get that little hair out. Onion hair, not human hair. Cook it for about 4 to 5 minutes until these are soft. Once the onions are translucent, we're going to add our garlic. Get all that goodie out of there. Cook this for just about 30 seconds to a minute. Not too long, just enough to kind of wake up that garlic. Once we have all of our prep done, now we have the fun part. So we're going to add our sauteed onions into the crock pot. I'm gonna add our vegetables, our kale, carrots, cauliflower, and celery. Our lentils. Maybe a tight fit. This will settle. Got our can of tomatoes. And once we get the heat on this, this will cook down. Okay. Our spices, we have a half a teaspoon of cayenne, a teaspoon of cumin, teaspoon of thyme, and a couple of bay leaves as well. A few cracks of pepper and a pinch of salt. And then we're gonna add some homemade bone broth in here, filling all the spaces. Pulled this from the freezer, so I got a little frozen chunk in there I'm gonna try to avoid. All right, once we get all of our broth in, we're gonna cover this and cook on high for 6 hours or low for 8 hours. All right, everyone, the cauliflower lentil soup is all done. Looks and smells delicious. I'm really excited because I'm pretty hungry. Usually we top ours with like mozzarella or sometimes feta cheese, which is kind of like the added sort of salty flavor. If you don't have time to, I guess, start this in the morning or do the crock pot version, you can just put everything into a pot like we did before and cook it on the stove top for about 90 minutes. You just want to make sure that you taste test the lentils and make sure that they're cooked through and tender. Well, I'm gonna get after this. I hope you all enjoyed this and give this a try at home. Thank you for watching.